The University of Texas has a core purpose, which is to transform lives for the benefit of society. Also, teaching skills of thinking that extend well beyond just the individual subject matter of the course. It teaches things such as understanding deeply, helping students to realize that they can personally create ideas. They're not just merely learning things. It helps people to learn from mistakes. Mistakes are often a guiding source of inspiration for all of us as we move toward understanding. It helps us to teach people how to raise questions. Students, if they learn to ask questions themselves, are well on their way to personal understanding. It helps people to learn how to follow the flow of ideas and see what leads to what. Inquiry-based teaching helps people to learn to think for themselves.
Understanding is actually a continuum. You can always understand anything better, whether it's something about your academic life, your professional life, your personal life, your political opinions. Continually pushing yourself to understand things better is an extremely potent method for making yourself more successful. There's a really fun quote from a 20th century comedian whose name was Will Rogers. He said, "It's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you do know that ain't so." In other words, one way to have trouble in life is to pretend to know things that you do not actually know. So, if you adopt the strategy of being more honest about what you actually know and what you don't know, then you're working at the most productive state in your mental life. That's when you can make progress, because you're always being honest about what you know. One of the most famous inventors of all time was, of course, Thomas Edison. And one of the famous quotes that he had is that invention is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. Well, the 99% perspiration was making mistakes. When he invented the light bulb, he literally made 10,000 light bulbs that didn't work. And somebody asked him about that and said, "Well, didn't you feel terrible having failed that many times?" And he said, No. I learned 10,000 ways that didn't work." He was learning from each mistake. You should relish it. You should look at it and look and see what there is to learn in that mistake. It's directive. It's telling you what was wrong if you ask the question, exactly why was that a mistake? And then it forces you in the right direction. So raising questions is one of the best strategies for creating success and insight. One of the most important strategies that you can use when you're faced with a difficult challenge, whether it's an academic problem or some issue in your life, is to, instead of doing it, don't do it. Instead, create an alternative question that's an easier version of the question, or a simpler version of the question you're actually after. For example, if the question has a big number in it, do the analogous question for a very small number. Can you do it with a specific case instead of in great generality? When you look at a simpler situation by posing those kinds of questions, you can force yourself to learn. You teach yourself things, because when you solve the simpler question, you can then apply the insights that you used to understand that simpler question to actually apply it to the more complex question. Whatever our understanding is now, it came from a long history of development and will improve as time goes on. This vision that things are changing changes how it is that we perceive the world. And I wanted to give you a couple of stories that are associated with this. One is a lesson that I learned from a mentor of mine. His name was R.H. Bing, and he was a famous topologist. Now, how famous can topologists be? Well, maybe not too famous. And I was one of his mentees, and one of the things that he would say is, the time to work on a problem is after you've solved it. Well, what does that mean? The time to work on a problem is after you've solved it. And he explained it. He said, look, if you've been working on some challenge, whether it's and I'll say this, whether it's a mathematical problem or a problem in your life or a problem in business, an academic issue, if you have solved a problem, you've worked on something and you've solved it, the reason you've solved it is you had some insight. You saw it in some different way that allowed you to succeed where previously you had failed. You have some insight. What he was saying is, what's the chance that that insight was only applicable to that one single problem? Well, there's no chance. It must be also applicable to something further. Could you take that same problem and develop it even further? Take another step in that same direction? Could you take that insight and apply it in a different arena? Those kinds of applications of a new insight are what are going to allow you to extend progress even further. So this is the flow of idea. If you have the idea that you're always going to be able to find things that you haven't seen before, then when you've made a little progress, that's the opportunity to make more. I was trying to think about what is the difference between an expert at something and somebody who is maybe a beginner or not as expert. It's natural to describe that as saying the expert is better at it. I think many examples of being more successful, more expert at many things in life come about by actually thinking about doing a different task. In the case of doing mathematics, when I think of a student doing mathematics who doesn't really understand the mathematics, they're memorizing a certain collection of activities to do in order to hope to get the answer correct. An expert, a person who actually understands the mathematics, understands why every step fits where it is. So if you put yourself in the position of saying, what is the more expert person doing that's different from the way I'm approaching the question or the skill, you will find that your skill improves to become more like that expert.